He thought it was just another morning cleaning the school, until he found a little girl hiding under a table, crying over a punishment slip. One small act of kindness, a folded paper dove, a few gentle words changed her entire world. But when her thank you note was read out loud, the whole school erupted. And within days, the principal walked away in disgrace. Yet what looked like a victory was only the beginning. Whispers turned into rumors, and the man who lifted up a child soon found himself accused, suspended, and silenced. A community divided, a child's fragile voice on the line, and a single father fighting not just for truth, but for dignity itself. Will one janitor's compassion be enough to save a schooler? Will kindness cost him everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall cafeteria windows of Willow Creek Elementary, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floor. Earl Benton guided his mop in steady rhythmic strokes, humming an old country tune his wife Lena used to love. The familiar scent of pine cleaner hung in the air, mixing with the lingering aroma of breakfast. At 52, Earl took pride in his work, even if some folks just saw a janitor pushing a mop. 20 years in the Army had taught him that every job mattered, and his current mission was keeping these halls clean for the kids who filled them with life each day. The cafeteria was peaceful at 7:15 a.m., with only the distant sounds of early arriving teachers echoing from the hallways. Earl enjoyed these quiet moments before the rush of students would transform the space into a bustling hive of activity. His humming stopped abruptly when he heard something, a small, muffled sound coming from the teacher's table near the window. He paused, tilting his head to listen more carefully. There it was again. Definitely a sob, the kind that someone was trying hard to hide. Earl leaned his mop against the wall and walked slowly toward the sound. As he got closer, he could see the edge of the tablecloth moving slightly. Someone was underneath. "Hello there," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle and warm. "Mind if I check on you?" The sobbing stopped, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. Earl knelt down carefully, his knees protesting a bit, and lifted the corner of the tablecloth. There, curled up with her knees pulled tight to her chest, sat 8-year-old Maya Ortiz. Her dark eyes were red and puffy, tears leaving wet trails down her cheeks. "Maya, what's got you hiding under here so early?" Earl asked, settling himself on the floor next to the table. His old Army injury made it uncomfortable, but he'd learned long ago that getting down to a child's eye level made all the difference. Maya hiccuped and tried to wipe her face with her sleeve. In her other hand, she clutched a crumpled pink piece of paper. Earl recognized it immediately, a behavior warning slip. "Would you like to tell me about that paper?" he asked, pulling a clean tissue from his pocket and offering it to her. Lena had always kept tissues handy, and he'd picked up the habit after she passed. Maya took the tissue but stayed quiet for a moment, her small fingers smoothing out the wrinkled slip. "I got in trouble," she finally whispered, "because I was speaking Spanish." Earl's heart sank. "Speaking Spanish? To whom?" "Carmen. She's new, and she was scared because she doesn't know much English yet." Maya's voice grew even quieter. "I was just telling her where to find the bathroom, but Mrs. Harrison said, we have to speak English all the time now. It's a new rule." Earl felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had in the Army when something wasn't right. He watched as Maya's shoulders trembled with another suppressed sob. "You know what?" Earl said, reaching for a clean napkin from the nearby dispenser. "I learned something in the Army that might help." His weathered hands began folding the white paper with practiced precision. Maya watched, curiosity temporarily overcoming her distress. "What are you making?" "When I was stationed overseas, I met people who spoke all kinds of languages. And you know what I discovered?" He creased another fold carefully. "Every language is like a different kind of bird song. Some are quick and bright like sparrows, others smooth and flowing like doves." His fingers worked steadily as he spoke. "And just like birds make our world more beautiful with their different songs, people make our world richer with their different languages. With a final fold, he presented Maya with a simple but elegant paper dove. Maya's eyes widened as she carefully took the dove. "It's beautiful," she whispered, a small smile breaking through her tears. "You know what else?" Earl continued, his voice warm and steady. "Sometimes grown-ups forget important things. They forget that kindness should be in every language." He tapped the paper dove gently. "When that happens, it's up to us to remind them, quietly but bravely, just like this dove." Maya ran her finger along the dove's wing, her tears slowly drying. "Like being brave enough to help Carmen?" "Exactly like that," Earl nodded. "Being kind is never wrong, Maya. Not in English, not in Spanish, not in any language." The morning bell chimed in the distance, signaling the start of the school day. Maya carefully tucked the paper dove into her backpack, next to her favorite sketchbook. She crawled out from under the table, straightening her purple dress. Looking up at Earl with eyes that held both gratitude and lingering uncertainty, she whispered, "Gracias." Earl watched as she adjusted her backpack straps and headed toward the cafeteria doors. He pushed himself up from the floor, his knee cracking in protest, and retrieved his mop. As he resumed his work, his heart felt heavier, yet somehow fuller, like it often did when he thought of Lena and the way she'd always stood up for what was right. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, and Earl returned to his mopping, his quiet humming now carrying a different tune, one of concern, of care, and of the courage it takes to be kind in a world that sometimes forgets how. The evening sun cast long shadows across Earl Benton's driveway as he pulled up to his modest two-story home. The blue paint was showing its age, and the flower beds needed weeding, but the porch light glowed warmly in welcome. Through the kitchen window, he could see Caleb moving around, probably hunting for dinner. Earl's joints creaked as he climbed out of his old pickup truck. Today had been longer than usual, that encounter with Maya still weighing on his mind. He grabbed his lunch cooler and headed inside, the familiar squeak of the screen door announcing his arrival. "Hey, Dad," Caleb called from the kitchen. The microwave hummed as his 17-year-old son stood watching last night's casserole spin slowly behind the glass. At 6 feet tall, Caleb was already taller than Earl, but he still had that gentle way about him that reminded Earl so much of Lena. "Hey, buddy." Earl set his cooler on the counter and started unpacking his containers. "Anything exciting happen at school today?" Caleb shrugged, his dark hair falling across his forehead. "Same old stuff. Coach wants me to help with the middle school basketball camp this summer." The microwave beeped, and he carefully pulled out the steaming plate. "How about you? Usual day of fighting dust bunnies?" Earl smiled, thinking of Maya and her paper dove. "Had an interesting morning, actually. Helped a little girl who was having a rough start to her day." Something in his tone made Caleb look up from his dinner, studying his father's face. The boy had always been good at reading between the lines, another trait he got from his mother. "What kind of rough start?" Earl filled a glass with water, taking his time. "Oh, just one of those things. Sometimes kids need someone to listen, that's all." He didn't want to burden Caleb with the heavier details. Not yet. "Like Mom used to do," Caleb said quietly, pushing his green beans around the plate. The mention of Lena settled between them like a familiar blanket, warm but heavy with memory. Earl glanced at the calendar on the fridge, where tomorrow's date was circled in red. Lena's birthday. "Speaking of your mom," Earl said, opening the pantry, "I was thinking we could do pancakes for breakfast tomorrow. The special way." Caleb's face softened. With chocolate chips and strawberries? Their ritual breakfast, the way Lena always made it on special occasions. "You bet. Maybe even whipped cream if we're feeling fancy." Earl pulled out the pancake mix and set it on the counter for morning. "She'd probably tell us we're being silly, keeping up with all these little traditions." "No, she wouldn't," Caleb said firmly. "She'd love it. Remember how she used to say that love shows up in the small things?" Earl nodded, his throat suddenly tight. He watched as Caleb finished his dinner, noting how his son's movements were becoming more sure, more adult-like with each passing day. Soon he'd be heading off to college, and these quiet evening moments would become precious memories themselves. "Dad?" Caleb rinsed his plate in the sink. "You sure you're okay? You seem, I don't know, different tonight." Earl patted his son's shoulder. "Just thinking a lot today, that's all. Some days are like that." After Caleb headed upstairs to tackle his homework, Earl found himself in his bedroom, staring at Lena's Bible on the nightstand. It was well worn, its pages marked with colorful tabs and notes in her neat handwriting. He picked it up, feeling the familiar leather cover, and opened it to where her favorite bookmark still lay, a photograph of the three of them at the lake, Caleb just a toddler. But tonight, the words on the pages seemed to blur together. The weight of Maya's tears, the pink warning slip, and all the things Lena would have known exactly how to handle pressed down on him. After a moment, Earl closed the Bible and set it back on the nightstand. He wasn't ready for its wisdom yet, not tonight. Through the wall, he could hear Caleb's music playing softly, one of those gentle indie songs his son preferred. The house creaked and settled around him, holding its own kind of peace. Tomorrow would bring pancakes and memories. And maybe, Earl thought, some of Lena's strength would find its way back to him through the simple act of carrying on their traditions. The morning sun streamed through the third-grade classroom windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Maya Ortiz sat at her desk, hunched over a piece of paper while her classmates worked on their math problems. Her small hand moved carefully across the page, drawing gentle curves that would become a dove's wings. Mrs. Chen was writing multiplication tables on the whiteboard, her back turned to the class. Maya glanced up occasionally, making sure no one noticed she wasn't working on her times tables. Under her desk, she kept her special pencil case close, the one with the good-colored pencils her abuela had given her for Christmas. The dove was taking shape now, just like the napkin one Mr. Benton had made for her yesterday. Maya added little details, soft feathers, a peaceful eye, and the slight curve of the beak. Next to it, she carefully wrote her words, erasing and rewriting until each letter was perfect. "Dear Mr. Benton, thank you for being the only grown-up who saw me. Thank you for letting me be me." She signed her name at the bottom, adding a tiny heart dot over the I in Ortiz. The memory of yesterday's tears felt far away now, replaced by the warm feeling Mr. Benton had given her with his kind smile and paper dove. Down the hall, Earl pushed his cleaning cart past the teacher's lounge, where voices drifted through the partially open door. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Mrs. Hightower's worried tone caught his attention. "It's getting ridiculous," she was saying. "First, it was English only during instruction time. Now we can't even let them speak their home languages during recess? These kids need to feel comfortable being themselves." "I know," another voice, Mr. Patterson from 4th grade, agreed. "But Principal Whitaker says it's about maintaining educational standards and preparing them for standardized testing." Earl's hands tightened on his mop handle. He thought of Maya's tears yesterday, of all the children who carried their families' languages like precious gifts. The morning moved slowly. Maya waited until most of her classmates had gone to lunch before approaching the bright yellow box in the hallway. The sunshine box stood proudly near the main office, decorated with painted sunbursts and happy faces. A sign above it read, "Share your joy. Notes read at Friday assembly." Maya stood on her tiptoes, carefully folding her note one last time before slipping it through the slot. The paper made a soft swooshing sound as it joined the other notes inside. She hurried away, heart beating fast with nervous excitement. Earl was cleaning the cafeteria windows when he saw Maya scurry past, her dark braids bouncing. She looked different today, lighter somehow, like she'd shed yesterday's sadness. He smiled, remembering how his Lena used to say that kindness had a way of spreading itself around. The week crept by. Earl went about his usual tasks, mopping floors, changing light bulbs, fixing stuck lockers. He caught glimpses of Maya in the hallways, sometimes alone, sometimes whispering with friends. She would wave shyly when she saw him, and he'd wave back, glad to see her smile returning. Friday morning arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. Assembly days always brought a special energy to Willow Creek Elementary. Students filed into the gymnasium, their shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Earl stood near the back, leaning on his mop, having just finished preparing the space. The familiar sounds of children settling onto the hard floor filled the gym. Teachers called out quiet reminders, "Chris, cross applesauce, bubbles in your mouths." Principal Whitaker stepped up to the microphone, her gray suit perfectly pressed, her smile professional. "Good morning, Willow Creek Eagles!" Her voice echoed through the speakers. "Good morning, Principal Whitaker," the students chorused back. "Before we recognize our Students of the Week, I have some special messages from our Sunshine Box to share." She held up a handful of colorful papers. "Remember, these are the kind words and gratitude that make our school community stronger." Earl continued his work along the gym's edges, half listening as Principal Whitaker read notes thanking the lunch ladies for extra cookies, praising Mr. Patterson for his funny science jokes, and celebrating Miss Rodriguez for helping someone learn to jump rope. "And now," Principal Whitaker continued, unfolding another note, "we have a message for." She paused, her expression flickering for just a moment. "For Mr. Benton, our custodian." Earl's mop stopped mid-stroke. In the crowd of seated students, he saw Maya's shoulders straighten. The gymnasium buzzed with the familiar chaos of a Friday morning assembly. Hundreds of students sat cross-legged on the shiny wooden floor, arranged by grade level in neat rows that grew progressively less neat as the minutes ticked by. The kindergartners in front wiggled and whispered, while the fifth graders in back tried their best to look cool and unbothered. Earl stood in his usual spot near the back door, leaning on his mop handle. He'd just finished cleaning up a spill in the hallway and had slipped in quietly, not wanting to draw attention. The familiar scent of gym floor wax and rubber balls filled the air. Principal Whitaker stepped up to the microphone, her silver blazer catching the fluorescent lights. She tapped the mic twice, sending feedback squealing through the speakers. The students covered their ears and groaned. "Good morning, Willow Creek Elementary," she said in her precise, measured voice. "Before we begin our regular announcements, we'll share this week's selections from our Sunshine Box." A few students clapped half-heartedly. The Sunshine Box readings were usually pretty boring, mostly thank you notes to teachers for homework extensions or cafeteria staff for extra cookies. "Our first note," Principal Whitaker began, adjusting her reading glasses, "is from Jenny Thompson, thanking Mrs. Peterson for helping with her science project." Earl watched the students shift and fidget. A paper airplane sailed through the air before being quickly confiscated by a nearby teacher. He smiled to himself, remembering how Caleb used to get antsy during these assemblies too. Principal Whitaker worked her way through several more notes, her voice growing slightly mechanical. Then she pulled out a piece of paper decorated with careful drawings around the edges. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she scanned it. "And this one," she said, her tone changing, "is from Maya Ortiz in Mrs. Chen's third-grade class." Earl's hands tightened on his mop handle. He saw Maya, sitting with her class in the middle section, duck her head down. "Dear Mr. Earl," Principal Whitaker read, her voice carrying clearly through the gym. "Thank you for being nice to me when I was sad. You are the only grown-up who saw me that day. When you made the paper dove, it felt like magic, like hope with wings." The gymnasium grew oddly still. Even the kindergartners stopped squirming. "You didn't tell me I was wrong or bad," Principal Whitaker continued, her voice softening despite herself. "You just listened and understood. Thank you for letting me be me." She held up the paper so everyone could see Maya's carefully drawn dove in the corner. Signed, Maya Ortiz. For a moment, complete silence filled the gymnasium. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping. Others joined in, the sound building like thunder. Soon the whole gym erupted in applause and cheers. "Mr. Earl, Mr. Earl!" The chant started with the third graders and spread quickly through the crowd. Earl felt his face growing hot. He tried to step further back into the shadows by the door, but Mrs. Chen was suddenly there, gently pushing him forward. "Go on," she whispered, smiling. Dozens of cell phones appeared in parents' hands, recording the moment. The applause grew louder. Earl shuffled awkwardly toward the center of the gym, his work boots squeaking slightly on the floor. Maya stood up in her row, beaming at him through happy tears. Principal Whitaker gestured for him to join her at the microphone, but Earl couldn't make his feet move any further. His ears were ringing, and his heart hammered in his chest. The spotlight felt too bright, too exposing. All he could think about was getting back to his quiet mop closet where things made sense. He managed a small wave to the crowd, then turned and hurried toward the gym doors. He could hear Principal Whitaker trying to restore order, but the excited chatter of hundreds of voices followed him into the hallway. Earl didn't stop until he reached his closet. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard. The familiar smell of cleaning supplies and the sight of his neatly organized mop buckets helped steady him. He pulled out the handkerchief he always carried, one of Lena's old ones, and wiped his forehead. In the small space, surrounded by brooms and bottles, Earl's hands shook slightly. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He was supposed to be invisible, doing his job quietly in the background. But Maya's words echoed in his mind. "You saw me." Mrs. Hightower's fingers moved slowly across her phone's keyboard, but her determination was unwavering. She'd recorded the assembly moment on her phone, capturing the pure joy when Maya's note was read and the thunderous standing ovation that followed. Now, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, she carefully typed out her post for the district's Facebook page. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves," she wrote above the video. "Proud to work alongside Earl Benton, who showed us all what real leadership looks like. Willow Creek Elementary, kindness matters." The video began with Principal Whitaker's voice reading Maya's words. "Thank you, Mr. Earl the janitor, for being the only grown-up who saw me. Thank you for letting me be me." The camera panned shakily across the gymnasium as applause erupted, catching Earl's surprised face as he tried to shrink behind his mop. Within an hour, the likes and shares started rolling in. By dinner time, the comment section had exploded. Earl sat in his worn recliner later that night, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through his phone. He'd avoided looking at the post all evening, but Caleb had insisted. "Dad, you need to see this," his son had urged. "People are talking about important stuff." The comments made Earl's throat tight. "My daughter came home crying last month because she was told not to speak Vietnamese with her cousin at recess. Said it made other kids uncomfortable. Since when is being bilingual something to be ashamed of? Remember when my Tommy got that red stamp on his hand for lunch debt? He was 7. Humiliated him in front of everyone. These policies need to change. My granddaughter wears her hijab proudly, but last week a teacher suggested she try to fit in more. This has to stop." The stories kept coming. Parents, grandparents, and even former students shared their experiences. What had started as a simple moment of kindness in the cafeteria was unveiling years of quiet hurts and hidden struggles. Mrs. Hightower's phone lit up with messages from other staff members. The school secretary shared how she'd seen kids pretend they weren't hungry rather than face the lunch debt shame. A teacher's aide admitted she'd been told to discourage Spanish during homework help sessions. The video clip had now been shared by the local parent groups, then picked up by community pages. Each share brought more stories, more voices, joining the chorus of those who'd felt silenced or pushed aside. "These aren't just isolated incidents," one parent wrote. "This is a pattern, and it took a janitor with a paper napkin to make us finally talk about it." Earl's weathered hands trembled slightly as he scrolled. He remembered Maya's tears that morning, how small she'd looked huddled under that table. He thought of all the other Mayas, all the children who'd swallowed their words and hidden their tears. His late wife Lena's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes God puts us in places we think don't matter, but He knows better." She'd always said that custodians saw the real heart of a school. They were there early morning and late evening, witnessing the quiet moments others missed. The comments continued to pour in. "My son stopped speaking Korean after being mocked. Now he can barely talk to his grandmother. This broke my heart. The lunch debt policy? My kids qualify for free lunch, but the paperwork got delayed. They gave them plain cheese sandwiches and made them stand in a separate line. They were so embarrassed. "Thank you, Mr. Benton, for showing that kindness doesn't need a fancy title." Earl noticed Mrs. Hightower had replied to several comments, her warm personality shining through. "Y'all keep speaking up." Every voice matters in this conversation. She'd always had a way of rallying people together, whether it was for a bake sale or a cause close to her heart. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but Earl couldn't stop reading. Each story added another piece to a puzzle he'd seen forming over his years of quiet observation from behind his mop. The whispered conversations in hallways, the turned-away faces in the cafeteria line, the children who seemed to shrink a little more each day, it all connected. A message popped up from Mrs. Hightower. "Earl, honey, you've started something important here. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day for changing hearts." He was about to switch off his phone when Caleb's hand appeared on his shoulder. His son had that same gentle touch as his mother, firm but kind. Earl looked up to find Caleb's eyes, so much like Lena's, studying the screen. "Looks like you started something," Caleb said softly. The Monday morning sunshine struggled through the clouds, casting weak shadows across Willow Creek Elementary's halls. Earl pushed his cart past the teacher's break room, his mop swishing against the linoleum in its familiar rhythm. But something was different today. The usual morning chatter had been replaced by urgent whispers. Through the half-open door, he caught fragments of conversation. "Did you see how many comments? The superintendent called last night. Those policy memos." Earl kept his head down, focusing on his work, but his shoulders tensed. He'd tried to avoid looking at the video's spreading impact over the weekend, but Caleb had kept him updated. The view count had soared past 20,000. Parents from other schools were sharing stories. The local news had even called twice, but Earl had let them go to voicemail. Miss Kendra stepped out of the break room, almost bumping into his cart. Her face was pale, and she clutched her coffee mug too tightly. "Oh, Earl, good morning." "Morning," he said quietly, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "Everything okay?" She glanced back at the break room, then lowered her voice. "Emergency staff meeting at 7:45. Principal Whitaker called it last night. Everyone's required to attend." Earl nodded, checking his watch. 20 minutes. Just enough time to finish the main hallway. "Thanks for letting me know." The meeting room was unusually full when Earl arrived. Even the part-time staff had shown up, creating a tense atmosphere of crossed arms and worried glances. He took his usual spot near the back, beside the filing cabinets where he could lean against the wall. Mrs. Hightower caught his eye from across the room and gave him a small wave. He managed a weak smile in return, though his stomach churned. This was exactly what he hadn't wanted, to become the center of attention, to cause trouble. At precisely 7:45, Principal Whitaker entered. Earl had known her for 6 years, since she'd first taken the position, and he'd never seen her look quite like this. Her usual crisp blazer was slightly wrinkled, and her typically perfect hair seemed hastily arranged. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying its usual authority despite her appearance. "I'll get straight to the point, as I know you all have classes to prepare for." The room held its collective breath. "Effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as principal of Willow Creek Elementary." A gasp rippled through the room. Earl's hand tightened on his cart handle. "This decision is based on personal health considerations," Whitaker continued, though her eyes didn't meet anyone's. "The district will appoint an interim principal by the end of the week. Until then, Vice Principal Martinez will handle day-to-day operations." The silence that followed was deafening. Earl watched as teachers exchanged loaded glances, some covering their mouths in shock, others nodding as if they'd expected this. "Are there any immediate questions?" Whitaker asked, her voice slightly less steady. Miss Kendra raised her hand slowly. "What about the new policies? The language restrictions? The dress code changes?" Whitaker's jaw tightened. "All current policies remain in effect until reviewed by the interim principal and the district." She gathered her papers. "That's all for now. Please check your emails for updates throughout the week." She left as quickly as she'd arrived, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. The moment the door closed, the room erupted in hushed conversations. "It's the parents' backlash," Earl heard someone say. "The comments on that video. I heard the superintendent had an emergency board meeting yesterday. Those policy memos Kendra mentioned." Earl slipped out quietly, pushing his cart back toward the janitor's office. His mind whirled. He hadn't wanted this. He'd just been trying to help one crying little girl. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, sending bright shafts of light through the hallway windows. As Earl approached his locker, he noticed something unusual. Paper corners poked through the vents, creating a strange pattern of white against the metal. Setting down his cleaning supplies, Earl opened the locker door. A cascade of paper doves tumbled out, dozens of them, hand-drawn by children in crayon and marker. Some were decorated with glitter. Others had messages written in wobbly handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Earl. You're our hero. We love you." His vision blurred as he picked up one dove that looked familiar. Maya's distinctive drawing style, but this time with a message in both Spanish and English. "Gracias por tu valentía." Thank you for being brave. Earl sank onto his work stool, surrounded by paper doves, each one a testament to the impact of a simple act of kindness. He thought of Lena, how she would have loved this moment. How she always said that love had a way of multiplying when you shared it. In the quiet of his office, among the mops and cleaning supplies and paper doves, Earl whispered, "Okay, Lena, I'll keep going." The kitchen light cast a warm glow over the Bentons' modest dining table as Caleb stirred a pot of spaghetti. The familiar smell of tomato sauce and garlic bread filled their home, but tonight it couldn't lift the heavy silence that had settled between father and son. Earl sat at the table, absently arranging and rearranging the paper doves he'd brought home from school. "You've been quiet since you got home, Dad," Caleb said, testing the pasta with a fork. His voice was gentle, careful, the same tone Earl often used when Caleb was troubled. Earl picked up one of the doves, smoothing its creased wing. "Just thinking about Principal Whitaker." "You mean her resignation?" Caleb turned down the heat under the pot. "I heard about it from Jenny Martinez. Her mom's a teacher's aide." 28 years at that school?" Earl said softly. "Started as a math teacher, worked her way up, and now—" He trailed off, setting the dove back among its paper companions. Caleb drained the pasta in the sink, steam rising around him. "Dad, you can't blame yourself for this." "Can't I?" Earl's voice cracked slightly. "One little napkin fold, one moment with Maya, and suddenly everything falls apart. I never meant to cause such trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Caleb said firmly, bringing 2 plates to the table. He served the spaghetti with the confidence of someone who'd taken on cooking duties years ago after his mother passed. "You showed kindness to a scared little girl. Everything else? That was already there, just hidden." Earl watched his son, struck by the maturity in his words. Sometimes it was hard to remember Caleb was only 17. He carried himself with such quiet wisdom. "Maybe," Earl conceded. "But Whitaker's career was her responsibility?" Caleb finished, sitting down across from his father. "Those policies she made? That was her choice. The way she handled things after the video? Also her choice." They ate in silence for a few moments, the only sound the soft clink of forks against plates. Earl was about to respond when the phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the quiet evening. Caleb reached for it, checking the caller ID. "It's Pastor Joy," he said, holding out the phone. Earl hesitated before taking it. "Hello?" "Earl." Pastor Joy's warm voice came through clearly. "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." No, we're just—" Earl glanced at his half-eaten spaghetti. "We're just talking." "About today's events, I imagine." There was understanding in her tone. "That's partly why I'm calling. The PTA is organizing an emergency forum for Thursday evening. Parents, teachers, staff, everyone's welcome. They'd like you to speak." Earl's fork clattered against his plate. "Me? I'm just the janitor, Joy." "I don't." "You're the heart of that school, Earl Benton." Pastor Joy interrupted firmly. Those children's drawings on your locker prove it. The community needs to hear from someone who sees our kids for who they really are." Earl stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "I don't know the first thing about public speaking. And all this attention." He shook his head, even though she couldn't see him. "It's not what I'm good at." "Neither was Moses," Pastor Joy said, a smile in her voice. "But he spoke up when his people needed him." "That's not exactly the same thing," Earl protested weakly. "Isn't it? Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that need to be heard the most." Caleb had been watching his father pace, concern evident in his young face. "What is it, Dad?" Earl covered the phone's mouthpiece. "They want me to speak at a PTA forum." "You should do it," Caleb said immediately. "Those kids trust you. The parents respect you." Into the phone, Earl said, "I need to think about it, Joy." "Of course," she replied. "But Earl, remember what Lena always used to say about moments of choice?" Earl's breath caught. He did remember. Lena had believed that God placed opportunities in our path for a reason, that each moment of hesitation was really an invitation to grow. "Sleep on it," Pastor Joy continued gently. "Call me in the morning." After they hung up, Earl sank back into his chair, looking at the sea of paper doves spread across the table. Each one represented a child who had trusted him, who had seen him not as just a janitor, but as someone who cared. Caleb reached across the table and picked up one of the doves. "Mom would want you to do this," he said quietly. "She always said your quiet strength was your superpower." Earl smiled despite himself, remembering Lena's way of building him up when he doubted himself. He picked up Maya's dove, running his thumb over the carefully written Spanish words. The fear of attention, of speaking up, still churned in his stomach. But maybe that fear was less important than what these children needed. "Let me help you practice," Caleb offered. "We can work on what you want to say together." Earl looked at his son, this remarkable young man who'd grown up too fast, who somehow always knew the right thing to say. Then his eyes moved to the paper doves, each one a testament to trust and hope. Taking a deep breath, Earl whispered, "Okay, Lena, I'll try." The cafeteria was eerily quiet at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Earl sat alone at one of the long tables, a lined notebook open in front of him. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty room. His pencil tapped against the blank page, leaving tiny graphite dots but no words. He cleared his throat. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Earl Benton, and I." He stopped, crumpled another sheet of paper, and added it to the growing pile beside him. The words felt stiff, formal, nothing like the simple truths he needed to share. Running his hands over his face, Earl glanced at the wall clock. 2 hours until the first breakfast shift, and he hadn't written a single line he liked. The PTA forum was tonight, and his stomach churned at the thought of speaking in front of all those parents and teachers. "Lord have mercy, you're here early," came Mrs. Hightower's warm voice. She stood in the doorway, her flowered lunch lady apron already tied around her ample waist. Without waiting for an invitation, she pulled out a chair and settled next to him. "What's got you burning the morning oil?" Earl gestured helplessly at the notebook. "Trying to write something for tonight's forum. Pastor Joy asked me to speak, but—" He shook his head. "I'm just a janitor. What do I know about school policies?" Mrs. Hightower's eyes narrowed. "Just a janitor?" She clicked her tongue. "Earl Benton, you stop that right now. You're the one who sees everything in this school. The tears, the triumphs, the quiet moments nobody else notices. That's worth something." "Maybe." Earl fidgeted with his pencil. "But what do I say? How do I explain what's wrong without making things worse?" "Speak from right here." Mrs. Hightower patted her heart. "Tell them what you see every day. Tell them about Maya, about all our children who need someone to stand up for them." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "And remember what I always say, dignity don't cost a dime." Earl wrote that down, the first words to make it onto his page, without being immediately crossed out. "Dignity doesn't cost a dime," he repeated softly. The cafeteria door opened again, and Kendra Lewis stepped in, hugging a manila folder to her chest. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before approaching their table. "Mr. Benton, I heard you're speaking tonight." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I have something that might help." She sat down, laying the folder on the table. "I've been keeping copies of everything. The policy emails, the memos about language compliance and cultural uniformity, even the lunch debt notices." Her hands trembled slightly. "I was too scared to speak up before, but maybe you could use these?" Earl stared at the folder, understanding its weight. "Are you sure? This could cause trouble for you." Kendra straightened her shoulders. "These kids are worth it. I'll sit in the back tonight, but I'll be there. If anyone questions the facts, I can stand up." Mrs. Hightower reached across the table and squeezed Kendra's hand. "There's strength in numbers, honey." Earl opened the folder, scanning the emails. Each one revealed another piece of the puzzle. How small changes had slowly stripped away students' dignity, one policy at a time. His pencil moved across the page with new purpose. "The children deserve better," he said quietly, then looked up at his companions. "We all do." For the next hour, they worked together. Mrs. Hightower shared stories from her 20 years in the cafeteria, while Kendra pointed out key documents that supported their concerns. Earl wrote and rewrote, his words becoming clearer, stronger. As the first breakfast workers began arriving, Earl gathered his notes. His hand reached automatically for a clean napkin, folding it with practiced movements into a perfect paper dove. He studied it for a moment, then tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "For luck?" Mrs. Hightower asked with a knowing smile. "For courage," Earl replied. "Maya's courage, Kendra's courage, all of us who need to speak up." He stood, collecting the folder and his notebook. The cafeteria was coming alive now, the kitchen staff preparing for another day. Through the windows, he could see the first hints of sunrise painting the sky. In 12 hours, he would stand before the PTA and tell his truth. With one last grateful look at Mrs. Hightower and Kendra, Earl squared his shoulders and walked toward the door. He had floors to mop and bathrooms to clean, but for once his mind wasn't on his custodial duties. Instead, he was thinking about dignity, about paper doves, and about the power of standing up for what's right. The napkin dove rested safely in his pocket as he made his way through the quiet morning halls, a reminder of why he had to find his voice. Tonight, he would speak not just for himself, but for every child who needed someone to see them, hear them, and value them for exactly who they were. The multi-purpose room of Willow Creek Elementary was packed wall to wall with folding chairs, nearly every seat filled. Parents fanned themselves with PTA agendas while grandparents adjusted their hearing aids. The usual scent of floor wax and old gym equipment mixed with coffee from the hastily arranged refreshment table. Earl sat in a metal chair at the front, his work boots planted firmly on the linoleum floor. His clean uniform shirt felt stiff and formal compared to his usual work clothes. In his pocket, the napkin dove he'd folded that morning crinkled whenever he shifted position. Pastor Joy Hamilton stood at the podium, her gray hair neat under her signature purple headband. Her presence brought a familiar calm to the charged atmosphere. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We're here tonight to listen, to share, and most importantly, to work together toward positive change." The room settled. Earl watched faces in the crowd. Maya's mother Rosa dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Patel from the convenience store nodding seriously. Mrs. Rodriguez, who cleaned at the hospital after her teaching job in Mexico. "Who would like to begin?" Pastor Joy asked. A grandmother in a flowered dress stood slowly. "My granddaughter came home crying last month because her teacher said her braids were distracting other students." Her voice shook. "Those braids? They're how her mama bonds with her every Sunday evening. That's our tradition." Murmurs of understanding rippled through the room. More hands rose. Mr. Chen, whose twins were in second grade, spoke next. "My boys were told not to speak Mandarin during recess. They said it made other kids uncomfortable, but that's how they talk to each other. They're brothers." A young mother bounced a baby on her hip as she described how her kindergartner was given detention for wearing traditional dress on picture day. Another parent revealed how his son was denied breakfast because of 50 cents in lunch debt. Each story landed heavy in Earl's chest. He remembered Maya's tears, the crumpled warning slip, her whispered gracias. His hands clasped tighter in his lap. Pastor Joy maintained order with gentle authority, ensuring every voice was heard. "Earl," she said finally, "would you like to share your perspective?" The room hushed. Earl stood slowly, his knees creaking slightly. He pulled the napkin dough from his pocket and set it on the podium. "I'm just a janitor," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "Been one for 12 years now. Every morning, I unlock these doors at 6:15. Every evening, I'm the last to leave. I see your children when they think no one's watching." He paused, looking at the paper dove. "I see them helping each other tie shoelaces. I see them sharing sandwiches when someone's hungry. I see them teaching each other words in different languages, proud to share who they are." The room was completely silent now. "My late wife, Lena, she taught second grade for 30 years. She always said children are born knowing how to love. It's us grown-ups who sometimes forget." Earl's voice grew stronger. "I didn't do anything special with Maya. I just did what any grown-up should do. I let her know she matters exactly as she is." Rosa Ortiz wiped fresh tears. Several parents nodded vigorously. "We've got good people in this school," Earl continued. "Teachers who care, staff who work hard. But sometimes rules become more important than people. Sometimes we forget to ask why we're doing things a certain way, and who it might be hurting." He gestured to the gathered families. "Every story shared tonight, that's a child feeling less than whole. That's a family feeling pushed aside. And that's not right. Not in any language." Spontaneous applause broke out. Pastor Joy raised her hands for quiet. "What would you suggest, Earl?" He straightened his shoulders. "We start by listening, like we're doing tonight. We look at policies through the eyes of every child, not just some. We remember that test scores and uniforms don't matter more than dignity. And we make sure every kid knows they belong here, exactly as they are." The applause this time was thunderous. Parents stood, some calling out, "Bravo!" and "Thank you." Maya's mother hurried forward to hug him, whispering gracias through her tears. As the crowd began to disperse into smaller discussion groups, Kendra Lewis approached Earl quietly. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed him a manila folder. "You'll need these," she whispered, then slipped away into the crowd before he could respond. The fellowship hall at Grace Community Church buzzed with weekend energy. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm squares on the wooden floor where children darted between tables laden with casseroles, salads, and dozens of desserts. The aroma of fried chicken and fresh-baked rolls filled the air. Earl stood near the punch bowl, paper plate in hand, watching Maya chase her cousins around the room. Her laughter rang clear and unrestrained, so different from the tearful girl he'd found under the cafeteria table just weeks ago. "Earl!" Mr. Patel waved from a corner table, his usual pressed shirt replaced by a casual polo. "Please, join us." He gestured to an empty chair beside Pastor Joy, who was already deep in conversation with Rosa Ortiz. As Earl settled into the metal folding chair, he noticed how naturally different groups had mixed together. Teachers chatting with bus drivers, office staff sharing recipes with parents, kids from every grade playing without a thought to differences. The hall hummed with genuine community. "I've been reviewing the district policies," Mr. Patel said, pulling out a neat stack of papers from his messenger bag. His precise accountant's manner remained even in casual settings. "There are several areas where we can propose immediate changes." Pastor Joy nodded encouragingly, her purple headband catching the light. "Let's hear them, Raj. Sometimes the path forward is in the details." Mr. Patel spread his papers on the table, carefully avoiding a spot of spilled punch. "First, we need a clear, inclusive language policy. One that celebrates bilingual students instead of penalizing them." He glanced at Rosa, who sat straighter in her chair. "The current policy isn't even official," Mr. Patel continued. "It was just Principal Whitaker's interpretation. We can draft something better." My Maya, Rosa spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. She should not feel shame for speaking Spanish. No child should hide who they are. She looked at Earl, her eyes bright. Mr. Benton, you showed her that. You saw her when others looked away. Earl felt his face warm. Just did what was right, ma'am. Sometimes that's all it takes, Pastor Joy said, patting his arm. One person doing what's right can help others find their courage. Mr. Patel tapped his papers. Second item, lunch debt practices. No more colored wristbands or substitute meals that single out children. It's unnecessarily cruel. From across the room came shrieks of delight as Maya and her friends discovered someone had brought bubble wands. Soon the air filled with rainbow spheres floating past their table. Third, Mr. Patel continued, we propose a Student Voices Council. Let the children themselves have a say in school culture. With proper adult guidance, of course. Earl watched Maya showing a younger child how to blow bubbles gently. Kids often see things clearer than we do, he said softly. Pastor Joy leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone she used for important sermons. What matters now is unity. We're not here to shame anyone, not even those who made mistakes. We're here to make things better. Rosa reached into her purse and pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. Maya made this for you, Mr. Benton. She handed him a drawing of the cafeteria where a stick figure with a mop stood tall among smaller figures. Paper doves filled the sky above them. I want to thank you publicly, Rosa continued, her voice carrying enough that nearby conversations quieted. You showed my daughter that she matters, that her voice matters. Other parents nodded in agreement. Earl felt the weight of their gratitude, their expectations. He hadn't asked to be a leader. He'd just tried to comfort a crying child, the way Lena would have done. The thought of his late wife made him reach into his pocket, where he always carried her photo. The small photograph showed Lena in their garden, laughing at something off camera. Her kind eyes seemed to meet his across the years, as if to say, see, this is what happens when you open your heart. Carefully, he tucked the photo back into his pocket, keeping Lena close as he faced the challenges ahead. Maya ran past their table, trailing bubbles and joy, reminding him exactly why this mattered. The fellowship hall continued to buzz with conversation and laughter, plans being made and hope taking shape. Earl looked around at these people. Mr. Patel with his precise plans, Pastor Joy with her steady wisdom, Rosa with her quiet strength, and realized they had become something more than just parents and teachers and staff. They had become a movement. Monday morning brought a chill that made Earl's joints ache as he pushed his mop cart down the empty hallway. The squeaking wheels echoed against metal lockers, a familiar sound that had become part of his daily rhythm over the years, but today felt different. He noticed it first near the water fountain, a small paper dove, carefully folded and taped to the wall. Its wings spread wide, as if ready to take flight. Earl paused, adjusting his glasses to get a better look. The craftsmanship wasn't perfect, but someone had taken their time with it. As he rounded the corner toward the cafeteria, he spotted another one, then another. Small white doves appeared every few feet, like breadcrumbs leading a path. Some were decorated with colored markers, others plain and simple. A few had tiny messages written on their wings in children's handwriting. Be kind, and everyone belongs. When Earl reached his mop cart, his breath caught in his throat. Someone had transformed it overnight. Paper doves hung from the handle, perched on the bucket rim, and decorated the sides. They fluttered with each movement of the cart, creating a gentle rustling sound. Mrs. Hightower stopped in her tracks as she passed by. Well, would you look at that? She said, reaching out to touch one of the doves. Seems you've started quite the movement, Earl. He shrugged, feeling his cheeks warm. Wasn't my doing. I just folded one napkin for a scared little girl. Sometimes that's all it takes. She smiled, then headed toward her classroom. Throughout the morning, Earl watched as more doves appeared. Students would sneak them out of their backpacks when they thought no one was looking, quickly taping them to walls or slipping them onto bulletin boards. The interim principal, Dr. Martinez, walked the halls with an unreadable expression, examining the paper birds. Earl held his breath when Dr. Martinez approached him. "Mr. Benton," she said, her voice measured, "this is quite the artistic expression we're seeing today." "Yes, ma'am," Earl replied, gripping his mop handle tighter. "I could take them down if they're causing trouble." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, studying a particularly detailed dove that had musical notes drawn across its wings. "No," she finally said. "As long as they don't damage the walls, I think we can let the students express themselves." She gave him a small nod before continuing her rounds. By lunchtime, the cafeteria had become a paper aviary. Doves hung from light fixtures, perched on windowsills, and lined the serving counter. The lunch ladies had even gotten into the spirit, wearing paper doves pinned to their hairnets. "Mr. Earl," called out Jimmy from the 4th grade, running up to him. "Look what we made in art class." He proudly showed off a dove mobile, complete with string and a wire hanger. "That's mighty fine work, Jimmy," Earl said, helping him hang it from the ceiling. Teachers began incorporating the doves into their lessons. Ms. Thompson used them to teach symmetry in math. Mr. Richards had his English class write poems about what the doves meant to them. Even the stern-faced Coach Butler allowed his students to fold doves during their indoor recess. Earl continued his usual routine, mopping spills, fixing loose tiles, and cleaning windows. But now, everywhere he went, paper wings seemed to follow. Some doves were elaborate, made from origami paper with intricate patterns. Others were simple, crafted from lined notebook paper or old worksheets. Each one carried its own message of hope. As the afternoon bell rang and students began filing out, Earl noticed a small figure lingering by his cart. Maya stood there, clutching something to her chest, her dark eyes bright with anticipation. "Mr. Earl," she said softly, "I made these for you." From behind her back, she produced a carefully tied bundle of paper doves, each one folded with obvious care and attention. They were made from different colored paper, blues, yellows, and pinks, and each one had been decorated with tiny hearts and stars. Earl knelt down to her level, his knees creaking in protest. "These are beautiful, Maya," he said, gently taking the bundle. "Did you make all these yourself?" She nodded, beaming with pride. "I practiced at home until I got them just right. Mama helped me with the ribbons." She pointed to the string that held them together, tied in a perfect bow. "Thank you," Earl said, his voice thick with emotion. He carefully placed the bundle in his cart's supply basket, where it would be safe and visible, a reminder of why small acts of kindness mattered. Maya bounced on her toes, glancing at the clock. "I have to go catch my bus," she said, "but I'll make more tomorrow." She darted off down the hall, her backpack bouncing with each step. Earl watched her go, then looked around at the transformed hallway. Paper doves stretched as far as he could see, each one a silent testament to the power of a simple gesture. He reached into his pocket and touched the worn photo of Lena he always carried, remembering how she used to say that kindness had a way of multiplying itself. At the end of the corridor, the afternoon sun caught the white paper wings, making them glow like beacons in the fading light. Earl gripped his mop handle and smiled, ready to finish his day's work surrounded by these symbols of hope and change. The PTA auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Every folding chair was filled, with people standing 3 deep along the walls. Parents clutched phones and notebooks, teachers sat in nervous clusters, and 2 local reporters positioned their cameras near the front. The air felt thick with possibility and tension. Earl Benton tugged at his freshly pressed collar, trying not to fidget in his seat on stage. He'd polished his work boots that morning, and Caleb had insisted he wear his good jacket, the navy one usually reserved for church. His written notes trembled slightly in his weathered hands. Pastor Joy stepped to the microphone, her calm voice settling over the crowd. "Tonight, we gather as a community to address concerns about school policies and practices. Our first speaker is someone many of you already know, Mr. Earl Benton." Earl's boots seemed to echo against the wooden stage as he approached the podium. He glanced toward the back row where Caleb sat, receiving an encouraging nod from his son. Taking a deep breath, Earl unfolded his paper. "I'm just a janitor," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "Been one for 15 years at Willow Creek Elementary. Most days I mop floors, fix leaky faucets, and make sure the heating works. But lately I've been doing something else, watching our children hurt." The room fell silent. Earl continued, gaining strength. "Last week, I found a little girl crying under a lunch table because she got in trouble for speaking Spanish to help a new student. That ain't right. My late wife Lena," his voice caught for a moment, "she taught second grade for 20 years. She always said dignity doesn't cost the district a cent." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Earl gripped the podium edges. "I've seen kids skip lunch because they're ashamed of their debt balance displayed in the cafeteria line. I've watched students hide their traditional clothes in their lockers. That ain't dignity, that ain't respect." Mrs. Hightower wiped her eyes with a tissue. Several parents nodded vigorously. "Principal Whitaker served this district for many years," Earl acknowledged, his tone gentle. "But sometimes good people can't see the harm in their rules. Sometimes we all need reminding that every child deserves to feel proud of who they are, where they come from, and what language their mama sings to them in." A spontaneous burst of applause interrupted him. Earl waited for it to quiet before continuing. "I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm here because those paper doves our kids are folding, they're asking us to be better, to do better. And I reckon we owe them that much." As Earl stepped back, Pastor Joy introduced Kendra Lewis. The third-grade teacher approached the microphone with shaking hands but determination in her eyes. She pulled out a thick manila folder. "These are emails," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Directives about cultural compliance and testing optimization. Instructions to discourage non-English languages, even during recess. Memos about maintaining uniformity in dress codes that disproportionately targeted certain students." Kendra read excerpts, her professional tone making the content even more shocking. Parents gasped at particularly harsh phrasings. The interim principal, Dr. Martinez, listened intently from her seat on stage, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. When Kendra finished, Dr. Martinez requested the microphone. She stood, straightening her blazer. "As interim principal, I want to acknowledge the harm these policies have caused. Starting tomorrow, we will suspend all cultural restriction practices pending review. Furthermore, I propose creating a climate and culture task force to develop new, inclusive policies." She turned to Earl. "Mr. Benton, would you consider co-chairing this task force alongside Pastor Joy? Your perspective as both a staff member and someone our students trust would be invaluable." Earl blinked in surprise. He glanced again at Caleb, who was beaming with pride. Slowly, he nodded. The crowd erupted in applause. Parents and teachers rose to their feet, the sound swelling to fill every corner of the auditorium. Earl ducked his head, unused to such attention, but Pastor Joy gently steered him to center stage. As the standing ovation continued, Earl finally looked up. His eyes found Caleb in the back row, standing tall, clapping hard, face shining with emotion. In that moment, Earl felt Lena's presence too, as if she were right there, applauding alongside their son. The neon sign of Jerry's Diner cast a warm red glow through the window where Earl and Caleb Benton sat in their usual booth. It was nearly midnight, but neither felt ready for sleep after the intensity of the PTA forum. Half-eaten burgers and crispy fries scattered across their plates, while oldies music played softly in the background. Earl watched his son dip a French fry into his chocolate milkshake, a habit he'd inherited from Lena. The sight made his heart squeeze with familiar tenderness. "You did good tonight, Dad," Caleb said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Really good. I've never seen you speak like that before." Earl shifted in the vinyl seat, still uncomfortable with praise. "Just said what needed saying, that's all." He took a sip of his cola, ice cubes clinking. "Your mama would have done it better, though. She always knew exactly what words to use." "Mom would have been proud," Caleb said quietly, studying the tabletop's scratched surface. Remember how she used to practice her parent-teacher conference speeches in the kitchen? Walking back and forth with her note cards? Earl chuckled, the memory warming him. Lord, yes. Driving us crazy, reading the same parts over and over while burning dinner. But she always got it right when it mattered, Caleb added, smiling. Then his expression grew thoughtful. You know, watching you up there tonight, it kind of reminded me of what I used to want to do. Earl raised an eyebrow, waiting. Teaching, Caleb admitted, picking at his napkin. Or maybe counseling, working with kids somehow. He glanced up uncertainly. I know we haven't talked about college much since Mom. But lately I've been thinking. Earl's heart quickened. He'd noticed Caleb lingering over community college brochures in the mail, but hadn't wanted to push. Yeah? The way those kids look up to you now, how you listen to them. Caleb straightened his shoulders. I want to do that too. Maybe not exactly the same way, but I want to help kids feel seen, like Mom did, like you do. Earl had to swallow hard before he could speak. The community college has an education program, he said carefully. Mrs. Hightower mentioned it last week. Said they even offer evening classes for folks who need to work during the day. I know, Caleb nodded. I've been looking into it. They have a scholarship for local students. Applications are due next month. He paused. Would you be okay with that? Me trying for it? Earl reached across the table and gripped his son's shoulder. Caleb James Benton, nothing would make me prouder. Caleb's eyes shone. Really? Really? Earl sat back, shaking his head in wonder. You know, when all this started, finding Maya under that lunch table, I never imagined, he gestured vaguely, any of this. The speeches, the changes coming, but mostly, I never thought it would bring us here, to you finding your path. That's what Mom always said, right? Hope shows up in unexpected places. Caleb grinned. Usually she was talking about finding matching socks in the dryer, but still. Earl laughed out loud, drawing a smile from the sleepy waitress refilling their sodas. Your mama did have a way of making everyday things sound profound. She also said you were stronger than you knew, Caleb added softly. Looks like she was right about that too. Earl felt his eyes grow damp. He picked up his fresh soda. To your mama's wisdom, then? Caleb lifted his own cup. And to new beginnings. They clinked their plastic cups together, ice cubes rattling, while the diner's neon sign continued to paint their booth in its gentle, rosy glow. Thursday morning sunlight streamed through the cafeteria windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Earl Benton pushed his mop along the freshly cleaned floor, humming softly as he worked. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving behind the usual scatter of crumbs and spilled milk that he'd already tackled. A small sniffling sound caught his attention. Near the water fountain, 6-year-old Tommy Chen sat on the floor, his untied shoelaces splayed out like wet spaghetti. Tears tracked down his round cheeks. Hey there, buddy, Earl said gently, propping his mop against the wall. He crouched down, his knees creaking slightly. What's got you down? Tommy hiccuped, pointing at his shoes. Can't tie them. Mom usually does it, but she had to go early today. Well now, that's something we can fix. Earl settled onto one knee. Want me to show you how? The little boy nodded, wiping his nose with his sleeve. See here, Earl demonstrated with the laces. It's like making a tree. First, you cross the branches. His weathered hands moved slowly, letting Tommy watch each step. Then loop one branch, and the other branch goes around the tree. Tommy's tears slowly dried as he focused on Earl's hands, fascination replacing frustration. There we go. Earl finished the bow with a flourish. Want to try the other one yourself? Tommy's tongue poked out in concentration as he fumbled with the second shoelace. Earl guided him patiently until a slightly crooked but secure bow sat on his left shoe. I did it, Tommy beamed, throwing his arms around Earl in a quick, spontaneous hug of pure joy. Earl patted the boy's back briefly. Sure did, champ. You'll be a shoe-tying expert in no time. Tommy scampered off to class, proudly showing his tied shoes to everyone he passed. Earl watched him go with a small smile, then returned to his mopping, unaware that someone had been watching from the hallway. The rest of his day continued normally. He fixed a stuck locker for a 7th grader, cleaned up a spilled paint tray in the art room, and changed a flickering light bulb in the library. By the time evening rolled around, he was ready to head home to Caleb and maybe watch some baseball highlights. His phone rang just as he was collecting his things from his locker. The caller ID showed the district office number. "Mr. Benton?" The voice belonged to HR Director Matthews. "We need you to come to the administrative building tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. There's been a situation we need to discuss." Earl's stomach tightened. "What kind of situation?" "We've received an anonymous complaint about inappropriate physical contact with a student." Matthew's voice was clipped, professional. "As per district policy, you'll be suspended with pay pending investigation. Please don't report to work tomorrow." The words hit Earl like a physical blow. His hand gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "What? I never?" "This is standard procedure, Mr. Benton. We'll discuss details tomorrow. Please bring your security badge and keys." The line went dead. Earl stood frozen, his mind racing back through every interaction he'd had with students that week. The shoe tying, the quick hug. His throat went dry. He drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets. When he walked through his front door, Caleb took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "Dad, what happened?" Earl sank into his chair at the kitchen table, his voice rough. Someone filed a complaint, said I was inappropriate with a student." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "What?" Caleb exploded, jumping up from the couch. "That's crazy! You would never!" "They're suspending me while they investigate." Earl pulled out his badge, staring at his photo. 28 years at Willow Creek Elementary. All those children he'd helped, all those small kindnesses. Now this. "But you've done nothing wrong." Caleb paced the kitchen, anger radiating from every movement. "This is because of the reforms, isn't it? Someone's trying to shut you up." "I don't know, son." Earl's shoulders slumped. "I just don't know." They barely slept that night. Earl lay awake, remembering Tommy's bright smile, the paper doves, Maya's thank you note. Had his attempts to help actually put him in danger? Should he have kept his head down, just done his job without getting involved? The next morning he drove to school early, before most staff arrived. The cafeteria was dark and silent as he walked through it one last time. His footsteps echoed in the empty space where children's laughter usually rang. Mrs. Hightower caught him at his locker. "Earl, I just heard. This is ridiculous." "Please." He held up a hand, unable to bear her sympathy right now. I need to do this." He placed his badge and keys on the interim principal's desk without meeting her eyes. The metal clinked softly against the wood, sound like an ending. Walking out through the cafeteria doors, Earl paused for a moment. The morning sun was just beginning to fill the space where he'd spent so many years keeping things clean and orderly, helping kids with their small troubles, being a steady presence in their days. Now the silence felt heavy, wrong. His work cart stood against the wall where he'd left it yesterday, the handle still warm from his grip. A paper dove was tucked into the bucket probably left by one of the kids after he'd gone home. Earl turned away before the tears could fall. He walked out of his cafeteria, leaving behind the echo of thousands of good mornings and thank yous and children's voices that had filled his days for so long. The doors clicked shut behind him with a terrible finality. The morning light crept through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across Earl Benton's worn oak table. Bills fanned out before him like a deck of cards he couldn't win with. Mortgage, electricity, car insurance. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. Caleb hunched over his phone at the other end of the table, his jaw tight. "They're saying awful things, Dad, making up stories about you." His thumb scrolled furiously through comments. Someone wrote that they always knew there was something off about you. How dare they? Earl's shoulders sagged under the weight of invisible stones. "Don't read that stuff, son." "But it's not right," Caleb's voice cracked. "These are the same people who were cheering for you last week. Now they're acting like—" He stopped, swallowing hard. The phone on the counter buzzed. Another message from the district office. Mandatory meeting tomorrow with HR. Earl couldn't bring himself to pick it up. Mrs. Hightower texted. Caleb said quietly. They took down all the paper doves this morning, said it was a liability concern now. Earl closed his eyes, remembering Maya's careful folds, the hope in those simple paper wings. His chest ached. The screen door creaked, and Pastor Joy stood in the doorway, her usual warm smile replaced by worry lines. I came as soon as I heard, she said, settling into a chair Earl pulled out for her. Rosa called me this morning. She's keeping Maya home for now. The words hit Earl like a physical blow. Maya? But she. Rosa's scared, Earl. You know how it is for them, always having to be extra careful. Pastor Joy reached across the table, her dark hand covering his weathered one. She believes in you, but she has to protect her daughter first. Earl nodded mechanically. Of course. He would do the same in her shoes. That knowledge didn't lessen the hurt. Caleb slammed his phone down. This is garbage. That little first grader was crying because he fell. Dad helped him up and gave him a quick hug. Since when is being kind a crime? Since people decided to see shadows where there aren't any, Pastor Joy said softly. She pulled out a small notebook. Now, we need to document everything, every interaction, every witness. The truth will. The truth? Earl's voice came out rougher than intended. The truth is, I'm just a janitor who forgot his place. Should have stuck to my mop and kept quiet. Dad, no. Caleb moved to his father's side. You did nothing wrong. But Earl was already standing, car keys jingling in his hand. I need some air, he mumbled. Just need to think. Earl, Pastor Joy started. Let him go, Caleb said quietly. I know where he's heading. The drive to Riverside Cemetery was automatic, Earl's hands knowing every turn without his mind's input. The late morning sun couldn't penetrate the heavy clouds that had rolled in, matching his mood. He parked in the familiar spot, third row from the oak tree. Lena's headstone stood clean and simple, just like she'd been in life. Earl sat in his car, hands still gripping the steering wheel, unable to step out. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by his ragged breathing. All those years of quiet service, of doing his job and keeping his head down, he'd stepped up once, just once, to help a crying child. Now everything he'd built, every ounce of respect he'd earned through decades of honest work, felt like it was crumbling between his fingers, like the paper doves that no longer lined the school hallways. He stared at Lena's name etched in stone, remembering how she'd always known exactly what to say in moments like this. But now there was only silence, and the growing weight of accusations he never thought he'd have to face. The clouds thickened overhead, but Earl remained in his car, motionless, as if waiting for answers that wouldn't come. The evening shadows stretched across Earl's living room as he sat in Lena's old armchair, her worn Bible resting unopened on the side table. Its burgundy leather cover had collected a thin film of dust, a testament to how long it had been since he'd touched it. The gold leaf letters caught the fading light. To Lena, with love, Earl, Christmas, 1992. The house creaked with familiar sounds. In the kitchen, Caleb was going through the motions of making dinner, pots and pans clanking with more force than necessary. The boy's anger on his behalf touched Earl's heart, even as it worried him. Earl's fingers hovered over the Bible's cover, then withdrew. He'd never been as strong in faith as Lena. She'd known every verse by heart, found comfort in words that now felt distant to him. The leather seemed to mock his hesitation. A gentle knock at the door broke his reverie. Pastor Joy's silhouette appeared through the frosted glass, and Earl's stomach tightened. He wasn't sure he could handle more bad news. "Come in," he called, his voice rougher than intended. Pastor Joy entered, carrying a covered dish that filled the room with the aroma of her famous chicken pot pie. Mrs. Hightower followed close behind, her arms full of manila folders. "We're not letting you two eat microwave dinners tonight, Mrs. Hightower declared, making her way to the kitchen. "Caleb, honey, set the table properly. We're having a family dinner." Earl started to protest, but Pastor Joy held up a hand. The time for sitting alone with your thoughts is over, Earl Benton. She settled into the couch across from him, her eyes falling on Lena's Bible. You haven't opened it yet, have you? He shook his head, shame coloring his cheeks. Faith isn't a feeling, Earl, she said softly. It's a decision, a choice we make every single day, especially when it's hardest. Mrs. Hightower bustled back in, dropping the folders on the coffee table with a thump. And speaking of decisions, we've been busy. Got statements from 3 teachers who saw you with that first grader. All confirm you were helping him with his shoes, clear as day. That boy's mother is furious about this witch hunt. She's writing a letter to the board. Earl's throat tightened. You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. Maybe it's better if I just... If you... Just what? Mrs. Hightower put her hands on her hips. Resign? Let them win? Earl Benton, I've known you 20 years, served countless lunches alongside you. You're the most decent man I know, and I won't stand by while they drag your name through the mud. Caleb appeared in the doorway, dish towel over his shoulder. Dad, she's right. We can't give up now. What about Maya? What about all the kids who need someone to see them? Earl's eyes burned. I'm just tired, son. Tired of fighting. Then let us fight for you, Pastor Joy said firmly. She reached for Lena's Bible, running her fingers along its spine. You know what Lena would say right now? A ghost of a smile touched Earl's lips. She'd tell me to stop being stubborn. And to trust God's plan. The words felt rusty in his mouth, like keys unused for too long. Mrs. Hightower disappeared back to the kitchen, the sounds of plates and silverware creating a homey backdrop. The aroma of pot pie filled the house, reminding Earl of countless church suppers, of community that held together through hard times. I don't know how to pray anymore, Earl admitted quietly. Not like Lena did. Pastor Joy's eyes softened. There's no wrong way to pray, Earl. Sometimes it's just opening your heart and letting God in. Caleb sat on the arm of his father's chair, a steady presence. Earl closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his son's hand on his shoulder. The words came slowly, barely a whisper. Lord, I don't understand why this is happening. But Lena always said, you had a purpose, even when we couldn't see it. Help me. Help me be strong enough. For my boy. For the kids. For... His voice cracked. Pastor Joy and Caleb remained silent, their presence a shield around him. Mrs. Hightower's voice rang out from the kitchen. Dinner's ready. And Earl Benton, don't you dare say you're not hungry? A wet chuckle escaped him. Some things never changed. Mrs. Hightower's ability to mother everyone within reach was one of them. As Caleb helped him up, Earl's hand brushed Lena's Bible. Something made him pause. Instead of following the others to the kitchen, he picked up the worn book, its familiar weight settling in his palms. For the first time in years, he opened it. The pages fell open naturally to a well-worn section. There, in Lena's neat handwriting, a verse was underlined in blue ink. The words seemed to glow in the evening light. Do not be afraid. The doorbell chimed through Earl's quiet house, startling him from his daze. He'd been staring at Lena's Bible for what felt like hours. Through the window, he spotted Kendra Lewis shifting nervously on his front porch, clutching her laptop bag. Mr. Benton, she called softly. It's Kendra. I have something important to show you. Earl opened the door, noting the dark circles under her eyes. She wasn't wearing her usual cheerful classroom attire, just jeans and a wrinkled sweater. Come in, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Caleb's upstairs doing homework. Kendra hurried to his kitchen table, pulling out her laptop and a small flash drive. Her hands trembled slightly as she plugged it in. I couldn't sleep last night, thinking about that awful accusation. Then I remembered the hallway cameras. I asked Mrs. Hightower to help me access the footage from that day. Earl sank into a chair beside her, heart pounding. On the screen, grainy black and white footage showed the elementary wing's main hallway. He watched himself mopping near the water fountain, then pausing as little Tommy Martinez struggled with his shoelaces. There, Kendra pointed, clear as day. The footage showed Earl kneeling down, helping the crying first grader tie his shoes. The brief hug lasted maybe 2 seconds, a natural, grandfatherly gesture of comfort. Tommy ran off waving, clearly happy and at ease. "That's all it was," Earl whispered, his throat tight. "Just helping a kid having a rough morning." "I know," Kendra said firmly. "We all know. And look, the timestamp shows Ms. Rodriguez was right there in her classroom doorway. She saw the whole thing." A knock at the screen door made them both jump. Pastor Joy stood there with Rosa Ortiz, Maya's mother. Earl quickly let them in. "Earl," Pastor Joy said warmly, "Rosa has something she wants to tell you." Rosa stepped forward, her work apron still on from her diner shift. "Mr. Benton, I was wrong to keep Maya home. I was scared when I heard the rumors, but—" She took a deep breath. "My daughter cried all day yesterday because she couldn't come to school. She told me how you found her that morning, how you made her feel safe when she was afraid. You gave her back her voice." Earl had to blink hard against sudden tears. "I want to make a statement," Rosa continued, "about how you helped Maya, about your character. Pastor Joy is collecting letters from parents." Pastor Joy nodded, pulling out a folder. "We've got 15 statements already. Bus drivers, cafeteria workers, parents, all testifying to your years of quiet kindness. MrAlready.com. Patel is handling the legal side, making sure the district follows proper investigation procedures." Kendra clicked through more footage on her laptop. "I've downloaded clips from the past month. They show you're never alone with students. You're always in public spaces, always professional. This false accusation won't stand up to evidence." Earl's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the kitchen table, feeling its solid wood beneath his palms. For the first time since turning in his badge, he felt something loosen in his chest. Something like hope. "I don't know what to say," he managed finally. "Thank you, all of you. Don't thank us yet," Pastor Joy said with a gentle smile. "We've got work to do. Mrs. Hightower is meeting with the superintendent tomorrow morning. She's bringing the footage and our statements." Rosa touched Earl's shoulder lightly. "Maya asked me to give you this." She pulled a carefully folded paper dove from her pocket. Written across its wings in a child's careful printing were the words, "We believe in you." Earl held the dove in his weathered hands, and for the first time in days, he felt steady again. The truth would come out. Good people still stood up for what was right. Even in the darkness, hope found a way to fly. Caleb's footsteps thundered down the stairs. He froze at the sight of their kitchen full of supporters, his eyes wide with surprise. "Dad?" he asked cautiously. "What's happening?" Earl held up the security footage freeze frame, then the paper dove. "The truth is happening, son. Looks like we're not in this alone after all." Caleb's face broke into a relieved grin as Kendra explained about the footage. Earl watched his son's shoulders straighten, matching the new lift in his own spirit. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had a community standing with them. Most importantly, they had hope, fragile as a paper dove, but ready to take flight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the district office's main conference room. Earl sat straight-backed in an uncomfortable chair, his weathered hands folded on the polished table. To his left, Pastor Joy and Mrs. Hightower flanked him like guardians. Across the table, 5 stern-faced board members studied documents spread before them. Superintendent Davis cleared his throat. "Mr. Benton, thank you for your patience during this investigation." He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, shuffling through papers with deliberate care. "We've uncovered some disturbing information." Earl's stomach tightened. He'd barely slept these past weeks, the weight of accusations pressing down on him like a physical thing. But he kept his face neutral, the way he'd learned in the Army. Steady, watchful, ready. "First," Davis continued, "we've thoroughly reviewed the security footage Ms. Lewis provided. It clearly shows the incident in question was nothing more than appropriate assistance to a distressed student." He paused, making eye contact with Earl. The kind of basic human kindness we should expect from all our staff. Mrs. Hightower squeezed Earl's arm gently. He released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. However, Board President Thompson interjected, her voice sharp. What's more concerning is what our IT department discovered about the source of the complaint. She slid a folder forward. The anonymous email came from an account traced to Educational Excellence Consultants, specifically to Marcus Wheeler's office computer. The name hit Earl like a physical blow. Wheeler, the clipboard-carrying consultant who'd appeared shortly after Whitaker implemented her new policies. The man who'd prowled the halls taking notes, who'd pushed for operational uniformity and behavior standardization. Wheeler was hired under the previous administration, Thompson continued, her lips pressed into a thin line. His firm stood to lose a substantial contract if the district's new direction continued. A direction catalyzed, quite unintentionally, by you, Mr. Benton. Pastor Joy leaned forward. So he tried to discredit Earl? To protect his bottom line? Precisely. Davis removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We've terminated all contracts with Educational Excellence Consultants, effective immediately. Their attempt to weaponize child safety concerns for financial gain is reprehensible. Earl sat very still, processing. All those sleepless nights, the whispers, the disappeared paper doves, all because some consultant in a suit felt threatened by a janitor with a mop and a paper napkin. There's more, Thompson added, her voice softening. She pulled an envelope from her folder. This arrived this morning, addressed to you, Mr. Benton, from Lorraine Whitaker. Earl accepted the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. The handwriting was elegant, precise, just like its author. He opened it carefully, unfolding 2 pages of handwritten text. Dear Earl, he read silently. Words cannot express my deep regret for the culture I helped create at Willow Creek. In my pursuit of order and achievement, I lost sight of our most sacred duty, to nurture and protect the children in our care. Your simple act of kindness to Maya revealed what I had become and what the school had become under my leadership. The pain this has caused you is partly my responsibility, and for that, I am truly sorry. Your dignity in the face of these accusations humbles me. Earl folded the letter carefully, tucking it away. His throat felt tight. Davis cleared his throat again. The board would like to make a formal statement. He lifted a piece of paper. After thorough investigation, we find all allegations against Earl Benton to be completely unfounded. The complaint was fraudulent, motivated by financial self-interest, and Mr. Benton has demonstrated nothing but the highest professional and ethical standards throughout his service. Thompson stood, her authority filling the room. Mr. Benton, on behalf of the district, I offer our sincere apology for the distress this investigation has caused you and your family. We would be honored to have you return to your position immediately, both as head custodian and as co-chair of the Climate and Culture Task Force, if you're still willing. Earl looked at Pastor Joy, who nodded encouragement. At Mrs. Hightower, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He thought of Maya, of all the children who'd trusted him with their small sorrows and triumphs. Yes, he said simply, I'll come back. Excellent, Davis stood, extending his hand across the table. Welcome back, Mr. Benton. The district will issue a public statement this afternoon, clearing your name and explaining the circumstances. We owe you that much. As they filed out of the conference room, Pastor Joy touched Earl's shoulder. You okay? Earl patted his pocket, where Whitaker's letter rested next to the worn photo of Lena. You know what's funny? He said quietly. All this started because a little girl needed someone to see her, really see her, and now. He shook his head, smiling slightly. Now, maybe we're all learning to see each other a little better. Mrs. Hightower laughed, linking her arm through his. Come on, Mr. Fix. Let's go tell your boy the good news. They walked together through the district office's automatic doors into the bright afternoon sunlight. Earl squinted up at the clear blue sky, feeling the weight of accusations finally lifting from his shoulders. Sometimes, he thought, the truth needed nothing fancier than a security camera and a paper trail to come to light. And sometimes, healing started with something as simple as a folded paper dove. The Monday morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Elementary's brick facade. Earl stood in the parking lot, his familiar Navy work shirt crisp and freshly ironed, but his hands trembled slightly as he gripped his lunch bag. The investigation's outcome still felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. He checked his watch, 6:45 a.m. Usually, he'd be well into his morning routine by now, getting the cafeteria ready for breakfast. Instead, he found himself rooted to the asphalt, staring at the main entrance. "Dad?" Caleb's voice came from behind. His son had insisted on driving him today, skipping his morning basketball practice. "You got this." Earl nodded, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the doors. His new badge felt heavy in his pocket. Just as he reached for the handle, the door swung open. Mrs. Hightower stood there, beaming. "Perfect timing," she said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "We're almost ready." "Ready for what?" Earl asked, but she just smiled and gestured him inside. The front hallway was oddly quiet. Earl's work boots echoed against the freshly waxed floor, someone else's handiwork during his absence. He noticed paper shapes peeking out from behind classroom doors, whispers and shuffling sounds coming from around corners. As he rounded the bend toward the cafeteria, he stopped dead in his tracks. The entire hallway had transformed into a tunnel of white paper doves. They hung from the ceiling on clear threads, taped to lockers, propped in windowsills. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one carefully folded. Some were decorated with colorful designs, others bore messages in children's handwriting. "Welcome back, Mr. Earl. We missed you." Our hero. But it wasn't just the doves. The corridor was lined with people, teachers, students, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, parents. They stood shoulder to shoulder, grinning widely, many holding yet more paper doves. Someone started clapping, then someone else. Within seconds, the hallway erupted in applause and cheers. Kids jumped up and down, waving their doves in the air. Earl felt his chest tighten, his vision blurring. "Speech!" called out Mr. Patel from somewhere in the crowd. Earl shook his head, overwhelmed. But then he saw Kendra step forward, tears streaming freely down her face as she clapped. Next to her, Rosa Ortiz held her phone up, recording with one hand while wiping her eyes with the other. The interim principal, Dr. Martinez, stood at the far end of the hall, nodding encouragingly. Earl's voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I don't know what to say, except, thank you." He looked down at his work boots, then forced himself to look up again to meet the eyes of these people who had stood by him. "This school, you all, your family." More cheers erupted. Dr. Martinez made his way through the crowd, holding something in his hands. As he got closer, Earl recognized his old mop. But it wasn't exactly the same. Someone had decorated the handle with ribbons and, of course, paper doves. "Mr. Benton," Dr. Martinez said formally, though his eyes twinkled, "on behalf of the district and this school community, I'd like to officially welcome you back." He handed Earl the mop with ceremony, like presenting a sword to a knight. "Your position as co-chair of the Climate and Culture Task Force is also reinstated. With a slight modification, we'd like to add student advocacy to your title." Earl gripped the mop handle, its familiar weight anchoring him as the crowd cheered again. Someone started a chant, "Earl, Earl, Earl, Earl!" Through the forest of raised hands and waving doves, a small figure darted forward. Maya Ortiz, her dark braids bouncing, broke free from her mother's grasp and ran straight for Earl. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered against his shirt. Earl had to bite his lip hard to keep from breaking down completely. He patted Maya's shoulder gently, remembering that first morning he'd found her crying under the cafeteria table. How far they'd come since then. Teachers began herding students toward their classrooms, though many lingered to give Earl high fives or quick hugs. Parents stopped to shake his hand or pat his back. The cafeteria staff surrounded him in a group hug that smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. Caleb appeared at his side, eyes shining with pride. "See, I told you so." Earl looked at his son, then at the paper doves still gently swaying overhead. Each one represented a small act of faith, a tiny rebellion against fear and cynicism. Together, they had transformed the ordinary school hallway into something almost sacred. Maya still hadn't let go of his waist. She looked up at him with those serious dark eyes and said, "The doves were getting lonely without you." Earl squeezed her shoulder gently. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I guess we better make sure they have plenty of company from now on." The task force meeting room buzzed with energy as parents, teachers, and district staff squeezed into every available chair. Handmade signs decorated the walls, some with children's drawings of doves, others listing proposed changes in bright markers. Earl sat near the front, his weathered hands folded on the table, watching as Principal Thompson, their interim leader, wrote agenda items on the whiteboard. "Folks, let's get started," Pastor Joy called out, tapping her pen against a water glass. The chatter died down as she stood, her warm smile putting everyone at ease. "We're here today to finalize the reforms we've been discussing. Earl, would you like to open?" Earl cleared his throat, still not used to being in the spotlight. "Well, I think we should start by hearing from those most affected. Could we invite Maya up here? And maybe some other students?" Maya, who had been sitting quietly between her parents, looked up with wide eyes. Rosa gave her daughter an encouraging nod, and Maya made her way to the front. 3 other students, Jerome from 5th grade, Lily from 4th, and David from 6th, joined her. "Tell us what you need," Earl said gently, pulling out an extra chair for Maya. "No fancy words needed, just the truth." Maya twisted the hem of her shirt, but spoke clearly. Sometimes I feel bad when I help my friend Anna learn English. Teachers say English only, but how can I help if I can't explain in Spanish?" Jerome nodded vigorously. "And kids shouldn't feel bad about lunch money. Tommy cried yesterday because everyone could see his account was empty." Principal Thompson stepped forward, chalk poised. "Let's address these one at a time. First, our language policy." For the next hour, the room worked through each issue. Mrs. Plant Fortied Hightower, now head of the curriculum committee, proposed a new language buddy system. "We can celebrate bilingual students as peer tutors," she explained. "It's an asset, not a problem." Kendra, who had been taking detailed notes, spoke up. "I've researched other districts. Some have seen test scores improve when they embrace home languages as learning tools." The vote was unanimous. Principal Thompson wrote in large letters, "Policy 1. Inclusive language welcome." Mr. Patel, who had been studying the lunch payment system, presented next. "We can move all account information online, private, to parents only. No more colored wristbands or public markers." He paused, then added, "And I've found room in the budget for emergency lunch funds." Rosa wiped tears from her eyes as she raised her hand to vote yes. The second policy, Dignity, First Lunch Program, went up on the board. "Now," Pastor Joy said, "about giving students a real voice." She smiled at the children still sitting up front. "We're proposing a Student Voices Council with rotating student co-chairs working alongside adult advisors." Earl watched Maya's face light up as the adults discussed the details. 2 meetings per month, direct line to administration, real input on school decisions. "And who better for our first student co-chair," Mrs. Hightower suggested, "than the young lady whose courage started all this?" Maya's eyes grew round as saucers. "Me?" "If you want to," Earl said softly. "No pressure." Maya looked at her parents, who beamed with pride, then squared her small shoulders. "I'll do it." Applause broke out as Principal Thompson added Student Voices Council to the board. The final item brought Earl's heart into his throat. Mr. Patel stood again, this time with a thick folder of budget analyses. "We've been underpaying and undervaluing our support staff for too long," he began. "Custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, they're the backbone of this school." Earl tried to wave it off. Now, we don't need to." "Yes, we do," Pastor Joy interrupted firmly. "Dignity includes fair wages and respect for all." The proposal outlined salary adjustments, professional development opportunities, and official recognition of support staff as educational partners. Earl felt his eyes grow misty as hands shot up around the room to vote yes. Principal Thompson stepped back from the board, where 4 clear policies now stood. "Implementation begins next week," she announced. "But first," she turned to Maya with a smile, "I believe our new student co-chair might want to say something." Maya stood, trembling slightly but standing tall. "Thank you for listening to kids," she said simply. "Thank you for letting us help make things better." Earl reached for a paper napkin from his lunch bag. With practiced movements, his fingers folded and creased until a small dove took shape. He placed it gently on the table in front of Maya. She picked it up carefully, a smile spreading across her face. The same smile he'd first seen weeks ago under that cafeteria table, when a simple act of kindness had started it all. The aroma of sweet and sour chicken filled the Benton kitchen as Earl and Caleb sat across from each other at their worn oak table. White takeout containers dotted the surface between them, steam rising from freshly opened lids. Earl noticed his son pushing a piece of broccoli around his plate, a sure sign something was on his mind. "You're awful quiet tonight," Earl said, reaching for the container of fried rice. "Everything okay?" Caleb nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. He set down his fork and took a deep breath. "Dad, I've been thinking about something. Actually, I've been thinking about it a lot." Earl put down his chopsticks and gave Caleb his full attention. The kitchen light caught the silver strands in his hair as he leaned forward. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. Remember when I said I might want to go back to school?" Caleb's voice wavered slightly. "Well, I picked up some information from the community college." He reached into his backpack hanging on the chair and pulled out a slightly crumpled brochure. Earl watched as his son's hands trembled slightly while smoothing out the paper. The cover showed smiling students walking across a sunny campus. "They have this program," Caleb continued, his words coming faster now. "It's education and coaching. You can get certified to teach and coach high school sports." He glanced up at his father, gauging his reaction. "I've been looking at the requirements, and my grades are good enough. I could start next semester." Earl felt his chest tighten with emotion. He remembered Caleb as a little boy, setting up his stuffed animals in rows and teaching them multiplication tables. "Son, that's wonderful." "Really?" Caleb's eyes lit up. "I mean, I know it's not a fancy university or anything." "Hey now," Earl interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Community college is a smart choice. Practical, affordable, and most important, it's what you want to do." Caleb relaxed visibly, reaching for an egg roll. "It's weird, but everything that happened here at school, watching you stand up for what's right, it made me think about what I could do to help kids too." Earl pushed his plate aside and leaned back in his chair, studying his son. "Your mother would be so proud of you right now. She always said you had a teacher's heart." "You think so?" Caleb asked softly. "No so," Earl smiled. "Remember how you used to help the neighbor kids with their math homework? You had more patience than their parents did." They both chuckled, and the conversation flowed easier now. Caleb pulled out his phone to show Earl the course catalog he'd been studying. They talked about class schedules, part-time work possibilities, and financial aid forms. "I could keep my job at the grocery store on weekends," Caleb said, excitement building in his voice. "And maybe even help coach Little League in the summer for experience." Earl nodded, watching his son come alive with possibilities. "You know what? I've got a little saved up. Not much, but enough to help with books and supplies." "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to," Earl said firmly. "That's what parents do. We invest in our children's dreams." They spent the next hour planning and dreaming together. Caleb talked about wanting to be the kind of teacher who really saw kids, who made them feel valued, just like his dad had done with Maya and the others. As they cleaned up dinner, Earl felt a familiar ache in his chest, the bittersweet wish that Lena could be here to see their son's eyes shine with purpose. He walked to the living room, while Caleb loaded the dishwasher and picked up Lena's Bible from the side table. The worn leather cover felt smooth in his hands as he sat in his armchair. When he opened it, a small yellow sticky note fluttered out, landing in his lap. His breath caught as he recognized Lena's neat handwriting. "You are braver than you know." The note trembled in his fingers as memories of her flooded back. Her quiet strength, her unwavering faith in others, her gift for seeing the best in people. She had written dozens of these notes, tucking them into lunch boxes, coat pockets, and yes, her beloved Bible. Finding them in unexpected moments had been both comfort and guidance since she'd gone. "Hey, Dad," Caleb called from the kitchen. "You okay in there?" Earl cleared his throat, carefully placing the note back between the Bible's pages. "Yeah, son, just fine." The June sunshine streamed through the high windows of Willow Creek Elementary's gymnasium, creating warm patches on the polished floor where hundreds of students sat cross-legged in neat rows. The familiar scent of floor wax and fresh paper decorations filled the air as Earl stood near the back wall, his mop propped against the bleachers. He watched the students file in by grade level, their excited chatter echoing off the walls. The third graders, led by Mrs. Hightower, settled into their designated spot near the front. Maya sat with perfect posture in the second row, clutching a piece of paper to her chest. Her dark hair was neatly braided, tied with purple ribbons that matched her carefully chosen dress. Principal Martinez, no longer interim, stepped up to the microphone. "Good morning, Willow Creek Eagles." The students responded with their traditional "good morning" call, making Earl smile. Some things hadn't changed, even as so much had. "Before we begin our end-of-semester awards," Principal Martinez continued, "we have a special presentation. Maya Ortiz, from Mrs. Hightower's class, would like to share something with us." Earl's heart skipped a beat as Maya stood up, smoothing her dress before walking to the microphone. Mrs. Hightower adjusted it down to Maya's height, and the little girl unfolded her paper with careful fingers. "Dear everyone," Maya began, her voice clear and steady despite the hundreds of eyes on her. "This is a thank you note to everyone who helped me be me." The gymnasium grew quiet, the kind of silence that happens when even the wiggliest kindergartners sense something important is happening. "When I was scared to speak Spanish, when I thought I had to hide who I was, someone showed me that being myself was okay." Maya's eyes found Earl in the back of the room. "Mr. Earl made me a paper dove, and told me that when grown-ups forget to be kind, we have to remind them." Earl felt his throat tighten as Maya continued. "But then, something amazing happened. More grown-ups started being kind. Mrs. Hightower let me help new students who only speak Spanish. Principal Martinez says Buenos dias every morning on the announcements. My mom doesn't worry anymore when she speaks Spanish at school events." Maya turned the page, her voice growing stronger. "The best part is that now everybody makes doves. We fold them in art class. We draw them on our folders. They're everywhere, reminding us to be kind and brave." Parents in the audience were wiping their eyes. Earl noticed Caleb had slipped in through the side door, standing tall in his new community college t-shirt. "So, thank you to everyone who helped change our school. Thank you to the teachers who stand up for us. Thank you to the parents who spoke up. Thank you to Principal Martinez for listening. And most of all," Maya paused, looking directly at Earl. "Thank you, Mr. Earl, for showing us that one small act of kindness can change everything." Before Earl could process what was happening, Mrs. Hightower was gesturing him forward. His work boots squeaked slightly on the gym floor as he made his way through the parting crowd of students. "Mr. Earl," Maya said into the microphone, "we have something for you." Two other third graders came forward, carefully carrying a large flat package wrapped in bright paper. With trembling hands, Earl unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully framed paper dove, larger than any he'd seen before. It was crafted from dozens of smaller doves, each one bearing a signature or message from every third grade student. In the center, in Maya's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping us soar." Earl blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. They weren't the quiet tears of grief he'd shed for Lena, but warm tears of joy that rolled down his cheeks unashamedly. Maya stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. The gym erupted in applause. Earl could hear Caleb's voice above the rest, whooping and clapping. Mrs. Hightower was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and even Principal Martinez looked misty. With hands that had spent decades gripping mop handles and fixing broken things, Earl carefully lifted the frame above his head. The sunlight caught the paper doves, making them seem to shimmer and dance. The cheering grew louder, echoing off the walls of the gymnasium, but Earl barely heard it over the sound of his own heart soaring. Maya beamed up at him, and in that moment, Earl saw everything their small revolution had accomplished, not just policy changes and new programs, but something far more precious. A school where children felt safe to be themselves, where kindness wasn't just a word on a poster, but a living, breathing thing that grew stronger every day. The applause continued to thunder through the gymnasium as Earl held the frame high, the paper doves catching the morning light, a testament to how far they'd come and a promise of the path ahead. Golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the ancient oak trees at Grace Community Church, casting dappled shadows across checkered tablecloths laden with potluck dishes. The late spring breeze carried the mingled aromas of fried chicken, fresh-baked rolls, and Pastor Joy's famous peach cobbler. Children darted between the tables, their laughter, mixing with the cheerful conversations of adults, gathered to celebrate the changes at Willow Creek Elementary. Earl sat at a weathered picnic table, watching Caleb toss a football with some younger kids on the church lawn. His son moved with an easy confidence these days, especially since getting his acceptance letter to the community college's education program. Pride swelled in Earl's chest as he observed Caleb patiently, showing a small boy how to grip the ball properly. Maya and her mother, Rosa, arranged paper plates and plastic utensils at a nearby table, chatting in a comfortable mix of Spanish and English. No one gave them a second glance, except to admire the colorful tissue paper flowers they'd made to decorate the tables. Mr. Patel's wife was teaching Mrs. Hightower how to fold samosas, while Pastor Joy moved from group to group, making sure everyone had enough to eat. The peaceful scene shifted slightly when a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the gathering. Lorraine Whitaker stood hesitantly near the church parking lot, holding a covered casserole dish and clutching what looked like an envelope. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual formal suits, but her spine was still ruler straight, though her shoulders seemed to curve inward with uncertainty. A ripple of quiet spread through the crowd as people noticed her presence. Some parents whispered behind their hands, while others simply watched with careful expressions. Earl felt the weight of the moment settle around them all. He remembered his own dark days of doubt, when false accusations had threatened everything he'd worked for. The memory of that pain, and the healing that followed, moved him to stand. As he did, he caught Pastor Joy's eye. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Mrs. Whitaker," Earl called out, his voice carrying across the lawn. "There's plenty of room at our table." The former principal took a small step forward, then another. Rosa and Maya exchanged glances, then deliberately shifted to make space. Other conversations gradually resumed as Whitaker made her way to Earl's table, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her dish. "It's potato salad," she said softly. "My mother's recipe. I wasn't sure if I should come." "Everyone's welcome here," Earl replied, pulling out a chair for her. "That's kind of the whole point, isn't it?" Whitaker's eyes glistened as she sat down. She placed the envelope on the table, smoothing it with fingers that still shook. "I wrote this. Tried to write it several times, actually. It's a formal apology. To the community, to the children, to you, Earl." Before she could continue, Maya appeared at the table with 2 paper plates loaded with food. She set one in front of Whitaker without a word, then placed the other in front of Earl. The simple act of hospitality seemed to break something open in the moment. "Thank you, Maya," Whitaker said in Spanish, her pronunciation careful but clear. Maya's eyes widened in surprise, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "You've been practicing," Earl observed. Whitaker nodded. I've been taking classes at the community center, twice a week, I thought. I needed to understand what I'd been afraid of. She touched the envelope again. I know words aren't enough, but I hope they're a start. Rosa joined them, carrying her own plate. Starting over is brave, she said simply. We all make mistakes. The question is what we learn from them. More people drifted over, Mr. Patel with his samosas, Mrs. Hightower bearing a pitcher of lemonade. The tension gradually dissolved into the warm afternoon air as food was shared and stories were exchanged. Whitaker spoke about her own immigrant grandparents who had changed their name and forbidden German in their home, desperate to assimilate. I never understood until now, she admitted, how much was lost. Earl watched as the natural flow of community worked its healing magic. It wasn't perfect. Some parents still kept their distance, and certain wounds would take more time to heal. But here, under the oak trees with children playing nearby and good food on the table, it felt like grace in action. As the afternoon began to soften toward evening, Maya brought over a stack of napkins. Mr. Earl? She said, could you show Mrs. Whitaker how to make a dove? Like the one you made for me? Earl glanced at Whitaker, who looked both touched and terrified. I'm not very artistic, she warned. Neither am I. Earl chuckled. It's not about being perfect. Here. He took a napkin and began the familiar folds. First, you make a triangle, like this. Whitaker picked up her own napkin, following his movements with the same focused attention she'd once given to policy manuals. Her first attempt crumpled, and her second wasn't much better. But Earl noticed she didn't give up. May I? He asked, reaching for her hands. She nodded, allowing him to guide her fingers through the sequence of folds. Together, they created a simple but recognizable paper dove. Sometimes, Earl said quietly as they worked, the most important things we build aren't perfect at all, they're just honest. Whitaker held up her completed dove, studying it in the golden light. A child's laughter rang out across the lawn, and somewhere nearby, Pastor Joy started singing an old hymn. Others joined in, their voices carrying on the evening breeze as the paper dove caught the last rays of sunset. The peaceful scene shifted slightly when a familiar figure approached the gathering, clutching a covered dish and a white envelope. Lorraine Whitaker, wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual business attire, stood hesitantly at the edge of the crowd, her shoulders hunched slightly, uncertainty written across her face. Earl noticed her first. He remembered that moment in his kitchen weeks ago, when her handwritten apology had arrived in the mail. Now, watching her gather her courage, he rose from his seat and walked over. Brought potato salad, she said softly, lifting the dish. My mother's recipe. Well, every good picnic needs potato salad, Earl replied with a gentle smile. Come on and sit with us. Relief washed over Whitaker's face as Earl led her to a table where Maya and several other children were already settled. Maya's eyes widened briefly, but then she smiled. That pure, forgiving smile that only children seem capable of giving. Mrs. Whitaker, Maya exclaimed, do you want to learn how to make paper doves? Mr. Earl is teaching everyone. Whitaker placed her potato salad and envelope on the table, smoothing her dress as she sat down. I'd like that very much, Maya. Though I warn you, I was never very good at origami in school. That's okay. Earl chuckled, pulling out a stack of paper napkins. Neither was I until a certain young artist showed me how important they could be. He winked at Maya, who beamed with pride. Caleb jogged over from the football game, his cheeks flushed from exercise. He grabbed a bottle of water and settled in next to his father, automatically reaching for a napkin to fold. The movement was familiar now, almost meditative. First, we make a triangle, Maya instructed, her small hands confidently demonstrating each fold. Whitaker followed along, her movements tentative but determined. Then we fold it this way, like a book. The late afternoon sun painted everything in warm amber tones as more people gathered around their table. Pastor Joy stopped by with a plate of cookies, watching the impromptu origami lesson with satisfaction. Mr. Patel and his wife joined them, followed by Mrs. Hightower and several other teachers. As they folded together, conversation flowed easily. Stories were shared about the changes at Willow Creek, the new Student Voices Council where Maya shone as co-chair, the inclusive language policy that had parents and children alike standing taller, the Dignity First lunch program that made everyone feel welcome. Earl's hands moved automatically through the familiar folds, but his mind wandered through the journey that had brought them here. He remembered that first morning in the cafeteria, finding a crying child beneath a table. He thought of Lena, how she would have loved seeing this moment. People from all walks of life coming together, making something beautiful from simple paper napkins. Caleb caught his eye and smiled, understanding passing between them. The boy who'd once worried about being stuck in a small town now sat straighter, his future in education giving him purpose. Earl saw echoes of Lena in their son's gentle way with the younger children, in his quiet strength. Maya leaned over to help Whitaker with a particularly tricky fold. "See? Now it looks like wings," she explained, her voice carrying the same patience that Earl had shown her months ago. Whitaker's hands trembled slightly as she completed the fold, but her face glowed with accomplishment when the shape emerged. "I did it," she whispered, holding up her first paper dove. It wasn't perfect. One wing was slightly crooked, and the tail listed to one side, but that somehow made it more precious. "Now that's something worth celebrating," Earl said warmly, and everyone around the table applauded. Whitaker blushed, but her smile was genuine. The white envelope she'd brought lay forgotten as more napkins were distributed, more doves took shape. Children from other tables drifted over, drawn by the activity and the laughter. Soon the picnic table was covered with paper birds of all sizes and degrees of perfection. Rosa brought over a plate of her homemade empanadas, sharing them as twilight began to settle over the church grounds. The oak trees cast long shadows across the grass, and someone had strung up fairy lights that now twinkled in the growing dusk. Earl picked up one of the doves he'd folded and stood, walking a few steps away from the table. He held it up, remembering that first napkin dove he'd made for a crying child. How many hundreds had he folded since then? Each one a small act of hope, a tiny revolution of kindness. The breeze picked up, ruffling through the oak leaves and carrying the sound of children's laughter across the church grounds. Earl released the paper dove into the wind, watching as it caught an updraft and soared briefly before floating gently back to earth. "Thank you, Lena," he whispered, his voice carrying all the gratitude in his heart, for the woman who'd taught him about dignity, for the journey that had brought healing to so many, for the simple power of a paper dove to remind people of their shared humanity. Above them, the sky had turned to liquid gold, and real doves called from their perches in the oak trees, their soft cooing a benediction over the gathered community below. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Earl Benton, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.